The Whitegrass Heritage Project is an effort to document the history of the Whitegrass Dude Ranch, which began in 1913 and is located at the base of the Grand Teton Mountain Range, just north of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The Whitegrass Dude Ranch was considered a successful operation in an era when western dude ranches flourished and catered to an eastern clientele who were typically wealthy and well-educated. It was not uncommon for individuals, couples, and families to come and stay at Whitegrass for 4 weeks or longer and to return year after year. As a result, many lifelong relationships were established between ranch dudes and wranglers. After owner Frank Gailey died in 1985, the ranch was abandoned and the remaining 13 log structures deteriorated. In 2005, the Grand Teton National Park partnered with the National Trust for Historic Preservation to rehabilitate the ranch structures and to transform the former dude ranch into an educational center that would teach the skills necessary to preserve historic structures for national parks throughout the western states. The interview that follows documents some aspects of life at Whitegrass, either when it was a dude ranch or what it took to preserve the ranch and turn it into a national park training facility. A generous grant from the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies at Brigham Young University is making this project possible.
Today is the 3rd of September, 2014. My name is Matthew Heiss, and I'm working as a volunteer for the Grand Teton National Park, participating in the Whitegrass Heritage Project. And today, my wife Becky and I are here recording an interview with Elizabeth Woodin, who was here as a dude and later came back as a wrangler. And we will be talking about her experiences here at Whitegrass. Let me also mention that Bill Woodin is here, Beth's husband, and he is off camera, but if you ever want to chime in with something, your voice will be picked up and recorded. You're welcome to participate. Well, Beth, let's start out by, let me just record a little bit of your personal background to get a context for understanding who you are, and then we'll focus on your Whitegrass experiences. So this is kind of a 15-minute Reader's Digest of your life. Why don't you tell us where you were born and raised, and just a little bit about your family?
I was born in New York City in Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, and I stayed there just a few days, and then spent the first 4 years of my life on a little tenant farm, an old stone farmhouse in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, along the Delaware, in Pennsylvania. Okay. And we stayed there until it became apparent, I was the middle of 3 children, that the schools were not what my parents wanted for us. So, and my father worked in Philadelphia. He was an advertising agent, had his own advertising firm for medical advertising. Okay. So we moved into Philadelphia, where the schools were a little better, and we were enrolled in school there. And I spent the next, let's see, what would have been 16 years, no, not 16 years, about 14 years there in that school.
You did all your schooling, grammar school, junior?
No, at high school I went away to school because I wanted to learn Spanish. And the school I went to in Philadelphia only taught French, and they were very strict about that, and Spanish was considered an inferior language. So,
what inspired you to want to learn Spanish?
My parents spent some time in Guatemala visiting a friend of theirs who was the British consular representative there, and then the following year we were brought down for a visit with some people that were friends of his who had a coffee finca, coffee plantation. And so we spent 2 or 3 weeks in Guatemala, and I loved Spanish, and it was so nice, and the people were friendly. If you tried to say things, they were very nice about it and pleasant. And so I said, I want to learn Spanish. So I found a school that was taught Spanish. There were very few that did in those days. And so I went there and graduated from there. Then I went to
What year did you graduate from high school?
1964.
Okay.
And then I went to a small junior women's college called Bennett College.
In Pennsylvania?
No, that was in New York,
Okay.
Millbrook, New York.
Mm-hmm.
And that was wonderful because it had very small class sizes. And I had practically personal tutoring in Spanish language and literature.
Mm.
Because that school that I went to, it was a boarding school, gave me a wonderful background in Spanish. The woman who taught it had been a survivor of Dachau,
Wow.
and she was a dedicated, very good teacher. And I did shed my German accent in Spanish, but she was wonderful. And so when I got to college, they tested me out of all the lower division things, and I got to go up to other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked in the with the art historian, helping him correct papers and set up his slides. And then I went to the University of Pennsylvania because Bennett was just a 2-year school. So I graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 1968.
With a degree in Spanish and art history?
No, just I decided to major in art history when I got to Penn
Okay.
because it had a superior department and it was more exciting. And so, but I did take Spanish while I was there.
Okay.
I sort of had a dual thing.
What drew you to art history?
Interestingly, my true love in life has always been the outdoors and natural history.
Mm-hmm.
But for college, most of the studies were in taxonomy, which meant you had to capture, kill, and pickle and carve. And you can comment on this. He's a scientist. He's a herpetologist. And I didn't want to do that to my little friends. And so I decided I wanted to see what humans had done that was positive. Art, literature, language, how humans... Because I was really very nature-oriented to the point that I was, I think, rather antisocial. And so I kind of had a sense I better balance this a little bit. And I love studies of art history, and I speak several languages, and it's been a wonderful part of my life, and I hope has assisted Bill. We've had a lot of fun with the language thing, traveling in Europe for his interests in business.
What other languages did you pick up along the way?
Well, I had French from the second grade on,
Oh my gosh.
and had to take that through the 10th grade. And then I picked it up again in college, and it came right back. It was amazing. And Spanish, and then German.
Sehr gut.
Yeah, ice.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You spent a summer in
You're,
Spain too.
you're a hot one. Yes, I did spend. I spent the summer of 1965 living with a Spanish family in Segovia
Beautiful.
with the Experiment in International Living.
Yeah.
Thanks for that prompt. I forgot about that. But
Yeah.
that's another sort of home place that I'm very fond of,
Mhm.
and I still keep up with the family, and we go visit them, and it's a lot of fun.
So what happened after undergraduate degree at Penn?
After college, I decided that in spite of an art history degree under my arm, I didn't want to stay in New York or Philadelphia, which is where you really can use those. So I said I wanted to live in the West. And I had been doing summers as whitegrass wrangler,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd been a dude kid before that.
Right.
So I did want to live in the West, and it became apparent that Jackson Hole, as much as I loved it, was kind of like Shangri-La. It's a place you came to, but maybe not a place in those days anyway that you wanted to live. And Tucson, Arizona was a place my mother had spent time in the 30s during the Dust Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up on Arizona stories. So we had friends living there who needed some help. First my father and I went as visitors, and then I ended up staying on and helped them with their kids and carpooling, and when they went on vacations I babysat and did the house and horses and dogs and everything. So I decided that I wasn't going to get a job in art history in Tucson because it was, they didn't even have an art museum at that point. And they had galleries, but you had to be a secretary. That's what they wanted, was a secretary.
Yeah.
And I didn't type very well, and nor did I try very hard, because I didn't want to be tied into a secretarial job.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back to college in Spanish. They had a great department at the University of Arizona. And I taught as a teaching assistant and associate for 4 years there.
Did you get a master's degree?
I got a master's in Spanish.
Okay.
And in 1972. And then I'd been taking some classes in art history, in Spanish Golden Age art, painting mainly, and was planning to do a thesis and a master's in art history so I could keep teaching. It was a job, and I enjoyed it, and I didn't need much money, so it helped me, living a simple lifestyle. I could feed myself with it, and I wasn't married at the time, so I got an offer out of the blue to run the slide library in the art department and teach art history.
Wow.
And I wasn't getting anywhere with a PhD in Spanish, which I didn't really want to do, but I was continuing so I could TA, and I took the job in the art history department. And that's when I met Bill, about 1975. And
What was
Bill
he doing there at the university?
He wasn't. He lived in Tucson, and I met him
Okay.
through parties and
Okay.
association at a picnic to begin with, actually. And I knew who he was. He had been director of the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum for 17 years. And he was a herpetologist, a snake person.
Snake, yeah.
And I'm a snake person, so since I was very little. So we both attended some singles parties, and I ran into him at one of those. And I had known who he was from visual. Somebody said, "Oh, there's Bill Woodin." Oh, I tried to get a job at the Desert Museum when I first got to Tucson, and he didn't have any place for me. So you actually were a little more. Anyway, he didn't have a job for me, so I kept looking for other jobs and ended up getting my degree in Spanish, and then finally was working in art history. But those number of years later, I saw you at a party, and so I knew you were somebody I could talk to. So at a singles thing, I introduced myself, and we got talking, and so we could talk all night long about snakes and all the animals that we had, and how tolerant our mothers were, and because we had very similar childhoods and were rather unusual creatures, and so we met. So that was very nice.
Cool.
And that was 1975.
And what year did you get married?
78.
Okay.
No, 77. 77. Yeah, 77.
And then did you just keep teaching at Arizona?
I did. I stayed on in the art department until 81. But I could never travel with. He would go to Europe every year for his historic research, and I could never go because I was part staff and part faculty, and I could never take off time because I was teaching.
Yeah.
So I finally, in 1981, I quit after the school's session, the second semester, and then I was able to go with him on trips. I did take one little sabbatical and went over in 1978 the first time, but then I had to skip the other years.
Yeah.
But I was useful. I could use my languages to help him with things, and in those days, very few Europeans spoke any English, and I could do pretty well in French and Spanish and German. So it was fun, and we would on our trips would stay with people. We didn't stay in hotels. We stayed with families.
Wow.
And that was really very exciting.
Yeah.
Got a lot of cultural. And then they would come visit us in Arizona because Arizona is quite a destination for Europeans.
Yep.
So we've done lots of tours of Arizona with Germans, French, Spaniards, everything.
Of course.
So
your career after 81, after leaving Arizona?
Well, then I was mainly a housewife, and I worked as a volunteer. I was on the board of both the Desert Museum and the Nature Conservancy, and had a position as stewardship chairman of the board of the Nature Conservancy. It was a newly formed board, and they only had a few staff members, so we actually did quite a bit of actual work. We weren't paid or anything, but it was a volunteer thing. And then in 1989, I was asked if I would be interested in serving on the Game and Fish Commission, the Arizona Game and Fish Commission. And I said, well, that had never been a goal, but I've fished all my life.
Okay.
So I always have at least a fishing license. And in Arizona, you have to have a hunting license, too, to collect snakes or even move them out of the road or harass them in any way.
Oh, wow.
So I always got a hunting and fishing license. So I said, well, I looked into it, and Bill encouraged me because he'd worked with the Game and Fish Commission a lot as Desert Museum director. So I went for it, and that was a very exciting experience because you you had to be passed, you had to be appointed by the governor, and then you had to be passed by the Natural Resources and Agriculture Committee of the legislature, of the Senate. And so you had to go get to know all the senators, and most of them might think you were a greenie, or because it's a very agricultural state. And I know you in Utah will relate to that. And so I didn't have the easiest time, because the sheep growers and the cattle growers did not want me on there.
Why?
Well, they were very nice. They'd always buy me a beer and tell me how much they didn't want me on there. Because they thought that I had more of a environmentalist type of background, which I really didn't, because I'm a fisherman. I still keep parrots. They live a long time, so once you get a few, you have to keep them. And I do things that a true hardcore environmentalist would never do.
Right.
And because I was at Whitegrass for all those years, and understanding how people can live and ranch and do all this kind of thing, I had a very hybrid viewpoint of wildlife and wildlands.
But they didn't see that as they were...
I tried to, some of them I worked with and talked to them about it, and they all voted for me.
Okay.
I didn't get any negative votes, but it took lots of visits to them.
Okay.
And it was really interesting.
What does this commission do?
This commission, the Game and Fish Commission, as the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission, is in charge of managing and regulating all the wildlife in the state. And in Arizona, unlike Wyoming, the Game and Fish Commission appoints the director, hires and fires the director of the department, and the director answers to them. Then the director is the one in charge of all the staff, and there are 600 staff in the Game and Fish Commission in Arizona. Wyoming, Utah, and all the rest of them don't have that. The governor appoints the director usually. And then wildlife becomes a politicized item, and we don't want that in Arizona. We fought many battles over that particular issue, but still it is the same.
So are you regulating hunting permits, fishing licenses, fees, interacting with those who go out and inspect the fish hatcheries?
Fish hatcheries, boating, boating permits.
Okay.
OHV, off-highway vehicles.
Yep.
Let's see, what else do we do? Environmental education. There's a part of the Game and Fish Department that has a rehab facility for rehabilitating wildlife.
Injured animals?
Injured animals to return them to the wild, or use them as education animals to take around the schools. Yeah. And they interact with everyone in the state on anything that has to do with wildlife.
Wow.
So
cool.
It's a very exciting, and I sort of felt as if I was born to do it, even though I had no idea I wanted to do that.
You were also the only one who spoke Spanish on the commission.
Yeah. I was the only one in the whole department for a while that spoke Spanish.
And I was going to say, Spanish in Arizona feels like a real natural...
yes, but you'd be amazed. They had no employees who spoke Spanish. They had no one on the commission spoke any Spanish. So when a perpetrator came up who had shot a mule deer at a picnic, and he was from Mexico and didn't speak any English, I had to handle the whole case.
Wow. Wow.
So it was, and one time they brought the governor of Sonora up and didn't even tell me it was happening. I walked into the commission meeting. Oh, Governor Ocaña's here. Can you be translator for a conversation in front of the public?
Wow.
I'm not a simultaneous translator as good as I am in Spanish. It's hard. So I'm good at paraphrasing. So-and-so said blah, 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 and this is, my brain doesn't work fast enough. It just never has.
This appointment in 1989.
It was actually 90
when it finally happened.
Yeah.
Is this also a volunteer thing, or are you getting?
You get paid a little bit for your wear and tear on your car, and when you stay in hotels and your food, and it is basically volunteer.
How long did you serve in this capacity?
I did one term, which is 5 years.
Okay.
And then the political environment was such that I really decided, and I'd been away from home so much during those 5 years, all those things combined, I said, I've done my 5 years out, that's fine.
Okay.
I would do it again, however, because I think they need it right now. A little balance.
So this takes us up to 1995. Let's continue with the chronology here.
95. Let's see, what did we do after that? My mother was aging, and I spent a lot of time taking care of her and my stepfather. And actually, he died in 95, and so then getting my mother resettled and everything. And they both lived in Arizona, so that helped. '97 my father died, and those kinds of family things continue. And then that's a good question. I've been doing, I'm presently the president of the Arizona Heritage Alliance, and I went on that board, and that's all volunteer. We had to have a half-time director.
Explain what that does.
The Heritage Alliance protects and educates about the Arizona Heritage Fund. And the Arizona Heritage Fund was voted in by the voters in 1990, voters of Arizona, to take $10 million out of the lottery that would go to the Parks Department, and $10 million would go to the Game and Fish Department to do historic preservation, kind of work you're doing. There would be grants for that.
Yep.
Purchasing natural areas. I'll do the park side first. Purchasing natural areas, historic preservation. I say purchasing natural areas.
Education?
They don't do too much education. There are grants that you can apply for to get equipment for your parks, for local parks.
Okay.
State Parks uses a bunch of the heritage funds for their, not capital projects, but for some work on the different parks, and for buying new parks, buying land for new parks or adding to parks. On the game and fish side, they do environmental education too. On the other side, the game and fish one is environmental education, public access to public lands. So if a rancher, usually a rancher, has blocked access to a river or a pond or hunter access or something, then those monies go into raising matching grants, because all these heritage funds would trigger matching grants from private or governmental entities to build roads around so you could get into the places that you needed to get into.
Yeah.
So the public would have their access. That's a small part. A big part of it is the study, the investigation, the research, and the management of individual species, threatened and endangered species, like the condor, the black-footed ferret, the Mexican wolf. What else do we have out there? Those are the three of the biggest ones. Various.
In southern Utah, it's a tortoise that lives near St. George. But
Yes. Yeah, is that the Mojave tortoise?
I can't remember. Okay.
Anyway, we have some of those in Arizona too,
Yeah.
and they are also one that's managed by this program. And then the other part of that is to buy land for threatened and endangered species, specifically.
Kind of like what the Nature Conservancy does?
They
Buy
work with
land
the
and set
nature-
it aside?
Yeah, set it aside, and the problem has been recently that there's no money for operation or maintenance on those properties.
Yeah.
And some of the properties they bought have had whole ranches on them, and they don't have any money to maintain or fix up the buildings. But the money was voted in to protect the land, not to refix the buildings.
Right.
So we're trying to figure out ways to help them come up with a way of either buying the ranch, saving out the pieces that are really for the animals, selling off or partnering somehow with maybe a historical society to manage whitegrass or whatever it
The
has to
structures.
be. Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the legislature took away.
Well, I'm getting to that. Meanwhile, our little group is very small, but we work with the Sierra Club and Audubon and all the rest to fight to protect this Heritage Fund.
Yeah.
And the legislature and the governor have tried 37 or 8 times to take it away. Sometimes they've succeeded. One year, the governor, who was our best governor, she and the Speaker of the House needed to balance the budget, so they took $10 million out of the acquisition funds. The Nature Conservancy had been working with Game and Fish on the QT to purchase several properties. But they couldn't do it in public, because then when you bring these real estate transactions out in the public, it doesn't work until they're fairly far along. So they lost all the money and all those purchases for, springs, the headwaters of the Verde River and things like that were really important.
Yeah.
Because the governor so the legislature and the governor still owes $10 million. And we're trying to get that back to help with the operations and maintenance.
Wow.
So those are the kinds of things I work on. And I've been
Okay.
on the Desert Museum Board for 16 years. So that's
Wait, the same museum that
Yeah.
he was the director of? Okay.
Yeah, so
cool.
I started in 1984, and I did 4 years there, and then I've done 12 years more recently, since 1990, on the board of the Desert Museum.
And when did you get involved with this commission? I think you said the year, but I wanted to capture
Well, I started working on preparing to be on it, but I was appointed in 1990.
90? Okay.
Yeah.
And are you still actively engaged?
Oh, you bet I am, because
Okay.
they need they need the publics to be engaged with them. And I'm now a public engaging with them, the
Okay.
commission.
Cool.
And they need some guidance. We right now have a commission that has no diversity on it whatsoever. It's all white males over 55, hunters. And that's fine, but there's a lot of wildlife, and the constituency is much bigger than just the hunters. They're
Yeah.
important, very important.
Yeah.
But if it weren't for the hunters, we wouldn't have, well, the elk that we have in Arizona. We wouldn't have turkeys.
Mm-hmm.
They put all those back.
Mm-hmm.
And the bighorn sheep and the antelope, which they put hours and hours of hard work into. So I'm a big supporter, but you can't have that be the only thing
Yeah.
that's considered.
Yeah. You know what? There's one more little part of the story that I'm not sure that I got. And I mean, does this take us to the present before I ask that question, and then?
That brings us pretty much to the present. Yes, I take care. My mother died a year and a half ago, and I was very actively caring for her down. She was down the street,
Mhm.
so I lived over there 5 nights a week and coordinated her people who were helping her
Yeah.
other than me.
Yeah.
And that was a big time in my life. That was a long time.
Wow.
And I would come up here in the summers because she rented a cabin at Fish Creek
Uh-huh.
and was a fisherman, and she did that until she was 96.
Wow.
And she died when she was 98 and a half, but she,
Wow.
97, she couldn't quite do it. And it was hard, but she would come up and rent her cabin, and she would be there.
Beautiful.
And I would stay with her the whole time because she really couldn't be there by herself.
Yeah.
So that's
Awesome.
sort of what I've been doing.
I don't know if I didn't hear anything. Do you have children and
I have.
grandchildren? And
I have 4 stepchildren and 8 grandchildren.
awesome.
And one of the grandchildren is married, and 2 young ladies are, I think, both of them are going to get married pretty within the next year or so.
Okay.
So they're working their way down. And the youngest one I hope to take to Spain next summer.
Cool.
She's my Spanish one, so.
Awesome.
But she's going to be a physicist or something, but she loves Spanish, so. And she's good at it, so.
Good. Good. Well.
And I have a sister
Okay.
who lives in California.
hmm
And my brother died when we were quite young, and that was a big blow and very hard on the family. The family sort of deteriorated after that. My parents were divorced, and each one remarried, so I have multiple step
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
But very nice step families. I was very happy to be
Good.
part of their existence.
Good.